Once you've opened your eyes and realized, wait a minute, I'm genetically designed to be healthy. What do I need to be? Why am I so sick? And what do I need to get well? If you just stop and ask those two questions, why am I sick? What do I need to get and stay well? And here's the difference. The biologically accurate answer to that, the truth of that is, I'm sick because I'm living in a habitat or I'm making lifestyle choices that are incongruent with what my genome requires. Medicine says you're sick because you have bad genes or you have an inability to self-regulate. Those are both provably false. They're gone. It's not genes, it's epigenetics. It's how you express your genes, which is determined by your habitat and your lifestyle choices. You're not outside of homeostasis because you're defective. You're outside of homeostasis because you're in a state of adaptation due to stress because you're not eating, moving, and thinking properly.
Hey, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I have a very special episode for you today with a man whose work I consider to be one of the biggest and most profound influences on my own thinking, my own paradigm when it comes to health science of anybody whose work I've ever studied. And that's a very, very long list of amazing experts. This is somebody who has inadvertently, without his knowledge, become somewhat of a mentor of mine and profoundly influenced my thinking on health from a pretty young age. From my early 20s, I was studying this person's work, and I've continued to follow them and be heavily influenced by their work for almost 20 years now. His name is Dr. James Chestnut, and he's not widely known outside of chiropractic circles because he's an educator of chiropractors. And interestingly enough, I stumbled across his work because my older brother, Dr. Yoni Witten, is a chiropractor. And my brother was also very influenced by Dr. Chestnut's work. And when my brother and I were younger and we were roommates living together for many years, as my brother was going through Dr. Chestnut's certification program, all these books were lying around our house all the time. And I started reading them, and I started really loving what I was reading and how supported it was by so many studies, how rigorous he was in documenting the scientific evidence that backs up his claims. And the claims were simultaneously this amazing combination of being so novel and so revolutionary in the way of thinking, and yet so logical, almost to the point of being simple common sense. And everything just made this just clicked and made this profound amount of sense to me. And I would go so far as to say that his way of thinking, his paradigm of understanding human health became the basis of my own paradigm of human health. It became the foundation of it. And there's a really simple shift at the core of this, which is looking at humans from the perspective that a biologist would study any animal species. And as simple as that sounds, almost nobody does it. And when you do that shift, as you'll hear us talk about in this podcast, when you make that shift in how you approach human health and how you study what's going on with humans in the modern world, you gain access to a completely different perspective and a long and profound list of amazing insights that you cannot access unless you are looking at humans from that perspective. As long as you are studying human health in the context that most conventional and even alternative and natural health, holistic health, functional medicine practitioners are trying to look at human health from, you will not gain access to the kinds of insights that are arrived at through this way of looking at things. So I want to go so far as to say these are some of the most important podcasts that I have ever done. And these are absolutely must listen podcasts. If you want to understand human health, this, in my opinion, this paradigm that you will hear Dr. Chestnut present must be your foundational paradigm. And if it's not, you are going to end up confused. You're going to end up running in circles. You're going to end up down rabbit trails that lead nowhere. This is the essential foundational paradigm for human health. And in my opinion, there is nobody communicating it better and in simpler, more easily understandable ways than Dr. Chestnut. So with all of that said, and again, emphasizing these are must-listen episodes, let me tell you a bit about his background. He has a Bachelor of Physical Education. He's got a Master of Science in Exercise Physiology with a specialization in neuromuscular adaptation. He's a Doctor of Chiropractic. He holds a postgraduate certification in evidence-based chiropractic and lifestyle protocols. He's the author of 5 books, largely in the context of educating chiropractors in high-level evidence-based chiropractic knowledge and lifestyle knowledge. And his latest book is meant for the general public. And the latest book is on the relationship between lifestyle factors, epigenetic expression, and health. And it's entitled Live Right for Your Species Type. So this is basically a synthesis of all of these books that I was reading from him 17, 18 years ago, but made instead of for doctors, made for the general population. He also publishes a monthly research review where he summarizes, methodologically critiques, and explains the clinical relevance of peer-reviewed studies. He also recently developed the evidence-based chiropractic and lifestyle protocols, which are used in chiropractic offices around the world. He's also wrote the texts for, and still teaches the postgraduate evidence-based chiropractic and lifestyle provider postgraduate certification program accredited through the International Chiropractors Association. He's received numerous awards for his professional achievements and for his texts, his programs, his lectures, and including most recently the 2022 ICA Chiropractic Pioneer Award for his significant lifetime contribution advancing the field of evidence-based chiropractic and lifestyle. He presently holds the position of chair of the International Chiropractors Association Council on Evidence-Based Chiropractic and Lifestyle, and is a member of the ICA Committee on Chiropractic Postgraduate Education. He's also on the clinical advisory panel of the Australian Spinal Research Foundation and an adjunct professor at the Barcelona College of Chiropractic. And again, as much as you will hear chiropractic all over this bio, this goes so far beyond chiropractic. He happens to be a chiropractor who educates chiropractors on evidence-based chiropractic, but in my opinion, this is really the premier communicator, teacher on the most essential foundational paradigm for understanding human health in an intelligent way and productive way that is likely to help you think about your own health in ways that lead you to greater health in a very predictable, reliable way. So must listen episodes. I think you're going to glean a lot of insight from this. So with no further ado, enjoy. So welcome to the show, Dr. Chestnut. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So as I was just telling you before we started, and I would like our listeners to know, Dr. Chestnut has probably had maybe arguably the biggest impact on me and my thinking and my philosophies of health, my sort of foundational paradigm of health, maybe than any other single person I can think of. And the reason why is interesting because I've never actually purchased any of his course materials. The reason why is that my older brother went through all of his certification program as a chiropractor. Dr. Chestnut has extensive certification programs that are designed for postgraduate training for chiropractors. And my brother did this for several years. And during that span of time, I was living with my older brother, Dr. Yoni Witten, who now has his own online brand and is a world-class expert in pain and posture and things of that nature. I was living with him as my roommate. We're best friends. We're workout partners. We spend half of our day every day together. And all these books from Dr. Chestnut are laying around our house. Like, I don't know, probably at least, I don't know how many books are in your program. I want to say at least like 8 or 10, right?
Oh, I think for the certification, there's one for each module, which is 4. And then I've written a couple sort of more lay public friendly books since. So I don't know.
Okay.
had access to or
Yeah,
not.
so there was a handful of that and other materials and workbooks and audio programs and stuff like that. And they were around the house, and my older brother Yoni was studying these, every day for years. So I started studying them because he was so enthusiastic about him. And then I spent probably a good 2 years of my life really in dedicated study of your work
Wow.
without ever having purchased any of your coursework.
What a
And
gyp.
I think I wasn't even eligible for it because it was specifically for chiropractors. But it had an enormous impact on my thinking and my understanding of human health. And I would even go so far as to credit a lot of that foundational paradigm with allowing me to do the work that I do now in such a successful way. And it's informed really everything I've done over the last almost 20 years since I spent that time studying your work. And I'm really grateful for the work that you've done. And I'm really honored to be sitting here with you now, doing this interview so many years later with somebody who really was a big health mentor to me without ever even realizing it. So it's a pleasure, and I'm excited to dig into this interview with you.
Well, thank you for all that. I guess that's the thrill for all of us, is that when the work you do gets taken up and influences somebody else, and then they go help people be healthier.
Yeah.
So I always love to hear that, because it just means what we do has meaning, really, because that's the meaning of it, isn't it? Is that, and it's interesting because I know, just talking to you, prior to when we got started recording here, was, you are have done some work in psychology, but my courses were open to anybody who was interested. And one of the people, in fact, even in my latest book, one of the longest testimonials I have in there is from a psychologist
Mm.
who had a very ill daughter. And
Mhm.
it just so happened her husband was a chiropractor who came to my courses, and she came along, and she ended up, just grasping onto that paradigm, which, and then their daughter got much, much better, off all the psychological kind of meds and stuff. And they were just amazed when they changed how they eat, move, and think, how it changed, everything, which I know you've experienced, and are also passing on. But it's interesting that you mentioned the word paradigm so many times, because to me, that's everything. That's the key to it all, is that once you understand, where health comes from, and you get that paradigm, which is that which is, we'll talk about today, which is just, that we have great genes. It's our habitat, our environment, and our lifestyle choices that really determine if we express our potential. But we have all this potential. We're all genetic superstars. All of our ancestors had to survive over millennia for us to get here. So we've been naturally selected over millennia, and we're at the pinnacle.
Mhm.
And you think, well, then why are we so sick in industrial society? We're so sick because we've created an unhealthy environments and so many, easily accessible unhealthy lifestyle choices. So we can kind of believe this falsehood that we must be, genetically weak because we're so sick. But in fact, we're genetically the strongest humans that have ever lived, but we're living in the sickest environment and making the sickest choices. But once you get that paradigm, whether you're in psychology or physiology, or exercise physiology, or you're into nutrition, it doesn't matter. Once you get the paradigm, then everything becomes really clear, and your path, we all end up on the same path.
Mhm.
So, I do eat well, move well, and think well. But whether you're specializing in eat well or move well or think well, once you get it and you're getting the right information, we're all going to converge, and we'll all be teaching people the same things. So I think I was very pleased to hear you say paradigm so many times, because I think that, to me, is the crucial part of it, is getting people to understand, that the paradigm of health, because the health paradigm rather than the sickness paradigm.
I want to extend what you're saying a little further. I'm going to bring up the subject of COVID, even though it's radioactive. Just
Shouldn't be.
I'm not even going to say anything that's particularly polarizing.
Sure.
But Brett Weinstein and his wife, Heather, do you know them, by the way? Do you follow their
I,
work at all?
I know the name. I don't,
Okay, so Brett and Heather Weinstein are evolutionary biologists,
okay.
and they were college professors for a long time, and they've written a wonderful book, which you would love, Dr. Chestnut. It's called The Hunter-Gatherers. I have it right in my bookshelf next to me, and I was trying to search for the name, but I think it's called The Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century.
That's where I've heard their name. I think that with along with Boyd Eaton and all these folks, evolutionary biology for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So they've done a phenomenal job in the last few years during the COVID era, um, picking apart and analyzing what's going on from an evolutionary paradigm through an evolutionary lens. And really with this very sophisticated, very nuanced, highly intelligent analysis of all these things. And you've had a lot of wonderful commentary over the years too, and you've done a great job. But they've really brought this evolutionary biology focus. And what's really interesting is they got so much right. They predicted so much stuff correctly that would happen during the COVID era.
of course.
And now there are all these people who were attacking them the whole time and saying, "Oh, these people are crazy. They're wacky. They're quacks. They're conspiracy theorists." Now those people, in many cases, are being forced to acknowledge that, hey, those people over there got a lot right. How did they get so much right when we thought they were crazy?
Because the paradigm, once you get the paradigm right, and you understand how life works and how biology works. So, sort of this whole evolutionary biology or evolutionary health. Well, that's the only kind of health. So
Yeah.
it's not like it's not. If you study biology, there's only one paradigm, the biological paradigm, which I talk about all the time. But if you study humans, you very often are taught to study humans outside of the biological paradigm and study humans in the pathological paradigm.
Yeah.
But this is the gift that I was given. My dad's a PhD biologist, but I saw human health through the lens of a biologist, not a pathologist. And so once that light goes on, you realize how absurd everything we do is. And I always bring up the example in the history of species on Earth. No species on Earth has ever gone extinct due to bad genes, ever.
Yeah.
Right. And any species that humans have ruined their habitat, because that's how you destroy species. When you ruin their habitat, meaning they can't live according to what their genome requires, they can't find the proper foods, they can't move properly, they can't socialize properly, whatever it is. The only time we've ever brought a species back from the brink of extinction, an endangered species, is by protecting its habitat, not with drugs and surgeries and finding out what's wrong with it genetically and trying to mess around with its genes or injecting something into it, but by simply allowing it to live as it's genetically designed to live. But we're genetically designed to live because our genes evolved in concert with environment, in a particular environment, which allows us to get, the essential ingredients out of that our cells need to build healthy structure and function. And so, it's sad to me that people don't recognize why we got it wrong with COVID, why we get it wrong with heart disease, why we have it wrong with cancer. They're all the same. And the reason is because we're not looking at it through a biological lens. We're looking at it through a pathological lens. And so it's frustrating. And I'm not sure that these people are going to admit they were wrong. I think there's an awful lot that rests on them, on them being able to convince people of the incorrect paradigm, because there's an awful lot of cultural authority and money and industries, built around teaching people that they're sick because they're weak or because they got exposed to a germ.
Yes.
And in the vast majority of cases, that's not true. Now, there are some really, really bad germs, but none that have wiped out humans ever. They've killed some humans. Obviously, right? But we're here. So if the fear of germs was what was legitimate, then tell me what species germs have wiped out ever. Right. So obviously we want to make sure that as few people die as possible when there's a new germ around. But the truth of the matter is, this was a coronavirus. Right. And we knew from the beginning, if we just didn't do the Chicken Little panic, and if we just looked at it, we knew from the beginning, because of biology, we knew we were going to get natural immunity. We knew that it was going to have some effect predominantly on the very sick early on. And we knew that natural immunity was going to be the best option. And for some reason, well, I could guess the reasons, but for whatever the reason was, we just decided to look at this through the wrong lens. And I just wish that people would now step back and say, we got it wrong. You know,
Well,
the
what I
biggest,
what
go
what I
ahead, sorry.
realize is they don't even have the lens to be able
No,
to
they don't.
make that determination.
No,
You know, Brett and Heather Weinstein came out with a video just a week or two ago that was that where they said all these people are so confused as to how we got things right. Well, here's why, and it's exactly what you just said, which is the evolutionary biology as your base foundational paradigm
right.
allows you to see things accurately and make correct predictions about things that pertain to human health and
To all health,
human
to
and
all
human
living organism health.
yes and human physiology and you
Correct.
can make lots and lots of very accurate predictions based on this sort of foundational paradigm and the logic that comes out of that. And as soon as I heard this video from them, I went, oh my God, that's why I've been able to make these predictions. And it's specifically because of the evolutionary paradigm that I got from your work in particular. That was probably the biggest influence on that. But let's extend this a little bit deeper. So I want, and I don't even care if we have to do a part 2 or part 3. I know you have tons to teach, but I want people to get this point
Okay.
above all else. And you teach it in such a powerful way. And it's so important in today's world because everybody's, you know, in headlines in the media and the newspapers and everywhere we look, we're being entrenched into this paradigm that says essentially disease comes about as a result of random chance, as a result of bad luck, as a result of having this gene or that gene. And you know, we have these detailed genetic analyses, and you can do all sorts of fancy, seemingly scientific testing to get insight into all of that stuff. And then, as a result of bad luck or bad genes, we get disease, and then we need to wait for modern medicine and pharmaceutical companies to research and find a drug cure to our disease. So why is that whole paradigm screwed up in your view?
It's screwed up because it's biologically inaccurate. So it doesn't, it doesn't have any successes. And it's also, we can prove to be biologically inaccurate. So the great paradox isn't that the evolutionary biology paradigm is new. It's from the beginning of biology. It's that humans were removed out of it.
Yeah.
You know, no animals allowed in a restaurant, but there's humans inside. I mean, we are taught to see ourselves through a lens of that we are separate from all of the other species on Earth, that there's something special about us, but there isn't. We are governed by the exact same biological, physiological, and natural laws as every other living thing on Earth. We fall down when we jump off a building. You know, if we eat foods that are unhealthy for us, we get overweight and sick. If we put ourselves into a zoo called a city, we get the same um, behavioral issues, emotional issues, and physiological issues that we do when we take an animal out of the wild and put it into a zoo. These things are, you know, they're just irrefutable. And so the lens that we build is built from our environment. We're not born with any particular paradigm or belief system, because that's what a paradigm is. It's built for us. And when we go through the educational system that we go through, we learn from a very early age that we're not animals, and that when you're sick, you go to the doctor to get a pill. And these things are not accidental, by the way. They're all done on purpose, but that's the lens that's built. So that's why people don't even have the lens. When you spoke about it, you say they don't even have the lens. Well, of course not. The lens is built from your education, from the things that you're exposed to, you know. So that's the key, is that what you and I need to do is we need to try to change people's lenses, because once they change the lens, they're already smart enough. They already have enough common sense. Most people already know an apple's better than a donut. They're just told there's no difference in terms of whether or not they're going to be sick and well from people who make money from giving them the pill after they get sick. So the whole idea of this is that you know, once you understand well, let's just do something very simple. We know that the human genome is virtually unchanged in 40,000 years, but let's just look at the last 100 years. Nobody in their right mind would say over the last 100 years, there's been a major, shift in what humans have in terms of our genome of our species, right? So over the last 100 years, the human genome change is virtually zero. Chronic illness rates have done this: cancer, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, anything you want to think of as of a chronic illness has done this, right? So you can't blame this slope of a graph on that's a variable that's changing rapidly on a variable that's not changing. So it doesn't make any mathematical, logical, or scientific sense to blame increase in chronic illness on a change in genes, because genes haven't changed.
Yeah. Okay. And I just, for people who are listening instead of watching this video, can you explain that one more time verbally? And it's
Sure.
worth being a little repetitious here, because
Sure.
this point is critical for people to get, and I want them to hear it a second time.
Okay. So if you look at the amount of change in the human genome or any species over the last 100 years, other than things that things that just reproduce so rapidly, like some insects, but like any mammal over the last 100 years, there's been really no gene change. But the amount, the rate per capita, the rate per person, the amount of chronic illness per person since the end of World War II, but even again since 1900, say, right, has gone up exponentially. We have more cancer per person. We have more diabetes. We have more obesity. We have more ADHD. We have more autism. We have more digestive issues. We have more infertility. We have more impotence. We have more anger. We have more depression. We have more anxiety. We have more murder. We have more, all of the things you can think about that would talk about illness. We have more of chronic illness problems now per person, not just more because we have more people in the world. We have more per person than we've ever had ever in history. So we know that chronic illness is rising rapidly, but we know our genes have not changed at all. So it's not possible that the rapid increase in the amount of chronic illness can be due to genes, because genes have remained constant, but our change in our illness rates has increased exponentially. So therefore, there must be another variable that's responsible for the change in chronic illness rates. And that is very simple when you do the work. It's lifestyle. The changes in how we eat, move, and think track exactly to the increases in chronic illness. And I might add another point. The people who have the wrong lens have had more money and have prescribed more drugs per person every year for the last 75 years. And they haven't been able to change the increase in chronic illness. So that system's not working.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, is we can impose a third variable or factor on these graphs that you're charting here. Of one is the increase in chronic disease over the last several decades. And the other one is genetics. Genetics aren't changing. It's a flat line. Chronic disease is rapidly increasing. It's skyrocketing.
Rapidly.
And we can also add in the layer of modern medicine and advancements in technology, the number of pharmaceutical drugs that exist, all of the trillions of dollars that have been poured into research and development of pharmaceutical drugs for all of these various diseases, and all the other technology. And you chart that, and the graph goes up dramatically, just the same, in the same exact direction as the chronic disease rates do. Of course. And what that, in other words, what I'm getting at for people listening is that it's not that, hey, as we have more drugs and more medicine and more advancements in all these conventional medical paradigm technologies, medical interventions for diseases, that all of a sudden the chronic disease rate is flatlining and starting to decrease as a result of it. It's still going up. And in fact, in children especially, we're seeing, I think the statistics, it's like almost 50% of kids now have some sort of chronic illness. And it's kids are getting sicker and sicker, adults are getting sicker and sicker. And this should be obvious, what Dr. Chestnut is saying, that there must be some other variable that is explaining what's going on. And it's lifestyle, of course. And yet we still are educating physicians, MDs, with receiving virtually zero education in nutrition or lifestyle, which is the main cause of over 80% of
Correct,
the chronic
because
disease burden.
their interventions are very limited. It's a drug. It's first of it's a test, which isn't an intervention. It's just a test to figure out what they're going to give you. Then, but they're interventions, right? Their solutions, so-called solutions, are drugs, surgery, or chemotherapy. Right? I mean, that's it. That's all they have in their scope. And they've been so successful in convincing people that anything outside of that isn't real science,
Mm-hmm.
isn't real healthcare, is kind of quackery and is alternative. It's the exact opposite. If you look at, so sometimes I think for people, the reason they don't get this right is because they, again, they don't. The biggest part for me is if once you see yourself as an animal species, then you can start to talk common sense. So I always say to people, look, imagine back when the Great Lakes in the 1970s, right? And the fish in the Great Lakes started washing up on the shores with cancerous tumors on them. And the birds that were eating those fish, their eggs were going brittle and they were going, they were becoming a danger or going extinct. Would anybody in their right mind say, well, clearly the problem here is genetics? These fish all dying all of a sudden and increasing chronic illness in the fish and the birds, it must be genes. Something must have gone horribly wrong with all these genes in these animals to be dying and going in danger. Nobody in their right mind would say that. But even more so, if I said to you, well, the solution is to dump drugs into the lakes and to set up little hospitals on the side of the lake, so when these sick fish wash up, we can give them drugs and surgeries. And clearly that's the main thing that we must spend all our money on is treating these sick fish rather than trying to find out the cause of why they're sick, because we know the cause, it has to be genes. And when they wash up, we're going to give them, we're going to dump chemotherapy or radiation or all these drugs. Everyone will go, you got to be in, if you said that at a biological conference, if you said the way you were going to save a species in biology was, if you said that the reason any species is going endangered or becoming sick with chronic illness, and by the way, just so we're clear, humans are the sickest species in the history of Earth. We have the sickest kids, we have the sickest teenagers, we have the sickest adults and the sickest seniors and the sickest babies in the history of any species on Earth. To be clear, but if it was any other species, who in their right mind would say it must be bad genes? Right? The reason those whatever species on Earth is going extinct must be bad genes. Never. But it's because we've been so brainwashed into seeing ourselves as something magical. We've been able to be taught that we're defective, that the reason we're sick is because we have a defective gene and we can't self-regulate our own blood pressure or cholesterol or moods or sort of blood sugar, that we have to have somebody else give us a pill to override our defective system so that we can get a good score on a blood pressure test. It's all complete, utter nonsense. Provably false in 5 seconds. I'd be happy to debate 50 people who think they're experts in health that have the other paradigm and want to give people more drugs to solve these problems. And what happens when people get a drug? Do they get better? Do they take the pill for 3 months and get better, or 2 months, or 1 month, or 6 months? No, they get on this pill because they're told they're defective and they stay on that pill for life, and they add more pills with time. They cost more money and get sicker every year. But we take those same people and change their lifestyle. What happens? They get off the pills and they get healthier. It's so obvious.
It's amazingly obvious, and it's really bordering on common sense. And it's amazing to me how blind people have become to this very basic logic that you've just presented, what should be common sense for us all. And it is very clearly the result of what you were talking about earlier, that we humans have learned to think of ourselves as being outside of the realm of the basic common sense thinking that we would apply to the same predicament if it occurred in any other species of animal. We,
Except
as soon as we're
species.
dealing with ourselves, we go,
Right.
we're obviously the exception to these rules. And
Of course.
instead of doing the basic logic, like if you often present the analogy, like if a plant is wilting, if you've got a plant in your house and it's wilting, what do you do? Do you go, oh, let's figure out the biochemical abnormalities that are present that are causing this wilting and this browning symptom, and let's develop a drug that we can, inject into the plant or put into the soil such that it combats this biochemical pathway that's causing the browning and the wilting? Or do we go, oh, well, what do plants need? They need water and they need sunlight and they need good soil.
It-
Maybe it needs one or more of those, or maybe I'm giving it too much water, or
right.
maybe I'm giving it too much sun. But we need to modify one of those variables to give the plant what it
Of
needs
course.
to express its natural, healthy genetic expression that leads to health.
Because we
And
don't assume the
humans have
plant is
learned to think
genetically
of
weak.
ourselves as outside of that.
As genetically weak. And so
Yeah.
genes are this hidden thing that they can, oh, we're going to talk about genes and you don't know what they're doing. And so it's kind of like the mind, right? I'm sure you find the same thing in psychology. They're like, oh, it's this black box that we can't figure out.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, we can figure out. It's not hard. But anyway, they try to the reason they do genes is because they control all the information and you can't know what your genes are doing. By the way, yes, you can. They're doing just exactly what they're supposed to do. So calm down. But the reality is that they can make people there's this unknowable thing, and then there's some tests that they can do, and then they can tell you you're defective. And once they've told you you're defective, what do you do? So now we look at these things, we go, we don't look at wild animals anymore. Most people live in the city, they've never seen one. So what do we look at? We look at domesticated animals like cows, and they're sick all the time. So they're getting the antibiotics, they're getting all the stuff because we've domesticated them and made them sick. So now we've given them gross food that they're not designed to eat, and then they get sick. So then they get drugs, right? So yeah, once your eyes are opened and you're emancipated from this faulty belief system that is deliberately shoved into you and force fed into kids from the moment they're able to read or listen, and it's their whole lives, just like they force fed all this information about COVID, or about obesity or cancer and all the stuff that they do. Once you've opened your eyes and realized, wait a minute, I'm genetically designed to be healthy. What do I need to be? Why am I so sick? And what do I need to get well? If you just stop and ask those two questions, why am I sick? What do I need to get and stay well? And here's the difference: the biologically accurate answer to that, the truth of that is, I'm sick because I'm living in a habitat or I'm making lifestyle choices that are incongruent with what my genome requires. Medicine says you're sick because you have bad genes or you have an inability to self-regulate. Those are both provably false. They're gone. It's not genes, it's epigenetics. It's how you express your genes, which is determined by your habitat and your lifestyle choices. You're not outside of homeostasis because you're defective. You're outside of homeostasis because you're in a state of adaptation due to stress because you're not eating, moving, and thinking properly. We know this for sure. This is not maybe anymore. Like, it's absolutely unequivocally provably true with the best peer-reviewed journals in the world. I believe me, I've cited hundreds and hundreds of studies on this, as you know.
Mhm.
And so the only thing left, the science is so overwhelmingly clear. The only thing left is getting it out to the people so that they can actually take control of their lives instead of putting their health in the hands of somebody else, which is a bad strategy unless you've been run over by a truck and you need some traumatic, trauma surgery. Like, thank goodness it's there, obviously. But
Mhm.
in terms of everyday chronic health or sickness, in terms of your quality of your life and your ability to enjoy your life, it's in your hands. It's a meritocracy. Health is a meritocracy. And so if we can't get people to understand that, and if they're told it's too hard, take a pill, or they're thinking, oh, it doesn't matter if you change your life because you're defective anyway, so it doesn't matter. That's the struggle. But once they get the right answer and they realize, if I make some healthy lifestyle changes, that's where I have autonomy, and it's up to me. And once they do that, as you know, they see results very quickly.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, as soon as they just try it, they're like, oh, I do feel that. When I'm overweight and sick and I take that pill, I don't feel any better. My test score is just better, but I'm not better. I don't feel better. I don't weigh less. I don't have more energy. My sex drive isn't any better. I actually feel a little bit worse, but my test score is better. And the person with all the authority says that must mean I'm better. So therefore, I'll kind of take some solace in that. But the reality is I don't feel better. I don't look better. I don't perform better. But when I change my lifestyle, wait a minute, I look better. I feel better. I perform better. I sleep better. I'm better. And lo and behold, oh, all of a sudden my scores are coming along too.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal is not the score on a test. The goal is to give your body what it needs to express healthy structure and function.
Okay, so I think this is a natural segue from what you were just talking about with the distinction between what your biomarkers on a test are showing versus how you actually feel. Um, can you talk about maybe the distinction between the drug approach to trying to address a symptom or disease and what that is doing at the cellular, at the physiological level,
Sure.
versus the kinds of interventions that you and I espouse of addressing nutrition and lifestyle, and how that creates different kinds of effects at the cellular and physiological level, and maybe different sets of unwanted side effects. So
Sure.
can you if you get what I mean by that question?
Yeah, sure. So let's assume, let's maybe sometimes it helps to kind of to have a scenario, right? So someone goes into someone starts to, they go for their annual checkup, or they just not feeling well, and they go in and they inevitably they're going to get some tests, and they're going to get, what are the classic tests they get? They're going to get a blood pressure test, they're going to get a cholesterol test, they're going to get a blood sugar test, right? These are the big ones, aren't they? You don't really need a test to tell if you're overweight, by the way. It's kind of silly because some of the great myths, sorry, I'm just going to segue just for a second, but some of the great things you hear are, well, we're living longer. That's why we have more illness. I'm like, no, because the biggest rises in chronic illness are amongst our young,
Mm-hmm.
right? Breast cancer is not a sickness of old women, neither is cervical cancer. You know what I mean? ADHD is not so it's ridiculous to think it's because we're living longer. And it's ridiculous to think it's because, well, we just have better tests now. So we're picking up more stuff. Our diagnosis is better. I'll say, listen very carefully. 50, 60 years ago, we could tell if you had high blood sugar. Yes. We could
Mm-hmm.
tell if you had high blood pressure, and we could tell if you were obese. So all of the main problems are caused by, being overweight, undermoved, over psychologically stressed, high blood sugar, all these things. And we've known these tests have not changed in 50 years. And yet the things that are associated with these tests have skyrocketed. So it's not because we have better diagnostic tools, and it's not because we're living longer. Let's just get that off the table. So a person goes in and they're told they have high blood pressure. They're not told that you must be under some kind of emotional or physical stress. Let's address the cause of that and figure out why you are genetically expressing high blood pressure. What they're told is you have a defect in your ability to regulate your own blood pressure or cholesterol or moods or blood sugar. So what we're going to do is we're going to say this score here, it's called homeostasis. It's called where you are in a state of balance. And for blood pressure, we're going to call it 120/80. You know, they've got one for blood sugar. They've got one for body weight and your BMI. They've got all these things. And they're going to say, our goal is to get you into that zone. So they have what's called a Framingham chart, doesn't matter, but they have this thing and they say, our goal is to get you into that zone. We're going to use drugs to do it. We're going to create drug-induced homeostasis, and we're going to call that healthier. This is the entire premise of the medical field, is that they're going to somehow they're going to measure to see if you're outside of that zone. And if you are, they're going to call you sick, which you are. You are sick if you're outside of that zone, but you're not sick because of a defect. You're sick because of how you're living. So
Or
they're not,
drug deficiency.
yeah, you're not sick because of a drug deficiency, right? So it's almost certainly going to be an essential nutrient deficiency, and it's going to be a movement deficiency, enough proper movement, enough social interaction, self-love, self-confidence, all the things we can talk about. But what it's really based on is that you're not living in a way that's matched to what your genome requires to genetically express healthy structure and function, happiness, joy, quality of life, right? Your choices are defective, not your genes. So in medicine, the goal is to get you to homeostasis, drug-induced homeostasis. They'll give you a pill to change your score, and then they're going to say that makes you better. It doesn't make you better. It makes your score better. You're still a sick person with all the rocks in your backpack, as I would say, with all the stressors in your life, all the bad diet, all the lack of exercise, all the negative stressful thoughts. All those things are still in your life. You've just taken a pill to mess up your ability to self-regulate, because you deliberately self-regulated out of your state of relaxation or homeostasis into a state of adaptation, because you're dealing with a bunch of stressors in your life. Your body needed to shift you out of that because it's preparing you to do what? It's preparing you to get off the couch and exercise more. It's preparing you to look for better food. It's preparing you to find out and move to a better, healthier environment. It's preparing you for fight or flight, basically. But what they do is they don't recognize why you're out of homeostasis, why you're sick. They make the assumption. The whole thing is based on the assumption that you're sick because of bad genes or an inability to regulate your own body systems. Therefore, they give you a drug to override your ability to regulate your body systems, and they can do it. Drugs work to override biochemical pathways. Drugs work to stop you from the ability to raise your blood pressure appropriately, or raise your cholesterol appropriately, or raise your blood sugar, all those things, right? Drugs can stop that. But what they can't do is drugs can't address poor nutrition, which is why you're overweight and on all these nutrient deficiencies, and why you've got high blood pressure and high blood sugar, all these things. It can't, drugs will never address the fact of lack of exercise or proper movement to build bone density and muscularity and have a healthy heart and a healthy mind. Can't do that. And drugs can never address an inability to love yourself or to make social connection or to live in an environment that's supportive. Drugs can never fix any of the causes. They can only create a drug-induced score on a test that someone's going to say, now we've achieved the goal. But that's not a health goal. That's a
Okay.
test score goal.
Okay, so we've got two scenarios here. Somebody with poor metabolic health, somebody who's overweight, somebody who has high blood pressure, high blood sugar levels, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, elevated LDL, all these types of things.
The average adult in industrial life.
Exactly, 80 to 90+%, depending on which estimate of the metabolic health of the population in North America you're looking at, but roughly 80-90% of the population.
Yep.
And there's two paths that they have the option of taking. One is the conventional route. They're going to go see a doctor. The doctor's going to say, hey, you've got pre-diabetes or diabetes, you've got elevated LDL, you've got these risk factors for having heart attacks and so on. Let's get you on metformin to correct your insulin resistance, and let's get you on statins to statin drugs to lower your levels of cholesterol and decrease your risk of cardiovascular disease. Okay, so that's
probably going to get blood pressure meds too, I would say.
Right. Okay, so that's one avenue, and obviously the majority of the population is going down that avenue. And you are presenting an alternative avenue for people to go down, which involves harder work of lifestyle and behavioral and nutritional changes. Now, at the end of that, I guess setting up those two paths, let's say they create, just for the sake of this hypothetical scenario, let's say they create exactly, precisely identical changes in biochemical markers on lab tests. The same degree of change in LDL, the same degree of change in blood pressure, the same degree of change in blood sugar levels. What is the difference between those two approaches? How do their health destinies, their long-term like life trajectories differ in those two different scenarios?
Right. So two things we're going to look at. I think one is we're going to look at their physiology, and then we have to also look at their quality of life as well, and quantity of life. So all three of those things I think should be addressed. I'm going to say that I disagree with the idea that one requires hard work and one doesn't. I think that's a misnomer. I think I think a lot of people are convinced of that or believe that. But it's really hard work to be obese and tired and not sleep well and have no sex drive and can't play with your kids and your joints hurt. Um, that it's hard work to be sick. It's really hard work to be sick. And so there is no doubt that, if you haven't exercised in a long time, going for a walk can be difficult, but it doesn't have to be hard. In fact, I hopefully will get time at some point in this interview, um, because what I've learned over my 25 years of doing this is that it can actually be quite easy. And the whole idea is to stay in the comfort zone and stay in the easy zone. And that easy zone expands as you get a little bit fitter. And so what you're able to do in terms of, say, I'll just use exercise because it's such a simple example, but what you're easy to do within that zone increases as you go forward and stay in your comfort zone the whole time. So I would say that one of the tricks that I've learned about lifestyle change is that it should be easy and that you never do the hard stuff first. You never let people believe the falsehood that the easy stuff doesn't give you great benefit, because it does, or that it has to be perfect, or that a negative choice erases the good choices you've made so that there's no point going on because you've already failed. All these things are myths. So we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But my sort of hackles go up when I hear that it's hard work, because if you really look at it, it's incredibly difficult to be ill. It's one of the worst things. We would not wish it on any of our friends or loved ones. And if you say, what would you wish on your loved one? Being obese and tired and unwell, or having to go for a walk? I mean, who would choose the former, right? So it's not hard. But anyway, I digress, as they say. So there's been some really interesting work on this. So we can just use logic. And what I would say to someone, to your audience, everyone in your audience, is that you just know for yourself, right? That you already know that when you change and improve your lifestyle for a while, even if it's a short period. I think most people listening to this have probably had, gone on a diet, so to speak, or they've, had a New Year's resolution and they've improved their lifestyle choices and they saw changes. So we know for sure that lifestyle change works. So at least that's not the debate. And I think that with our previous discussion, and I think with common sense and logic, because people realize that their body weight could go up and they could go, start a healthy lifestyle plan, and that their body weight can go down, their fitness can go up, their blood scores can change on the cholesterol and all these things. We know this for a fact, but we know that person doesn't change their genes. We know that their genes, in their own genes, in that single subject design here of the study, we know that that person's genes do not change over their lifetime. But we know for certain that their body weight can change, their cholesterol levels can change, their blood sugar levels can change, their blood pressure can change, their moods can change. We know all these things, so that we know that these variables that we're talking about right now, that we're measuring, and their quality of life, we know that these things can change throughout a lifetime, but we know that the genes are constant in that individual throughout their lifetime. So now we can also know, and we've done a lot of other work previously, in this interview and maybe more later, just saying, listen, you're not taking the drug because you know that you're defective, that you have a genetic defect, or you have an inability to regulate your own blood pressure, blood sugar, body weight, moods, etc. So there's no point taking the drug simply because you know you can't get better. Let's throw that out too. So now let's have the even playing field, which is to say, you can have drug-induced homeostasis on your blood pressure, no drug-induced normal for blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar, or you can have lifestyle induced. But we know that both of those are proven to be able to get you to a better score on whatever test you're taking, correct? Now, the drugs, I would dispute and say that the drugs are you require more drugs over time, and eventually they don't even work. That's also proven, indisputable, but they will work for a short term. Anyone who says if you take blood pressure medication, it won't lower your blood pressure, that's not true. It will. The question is, does it make you healthier? Does it make you live longer? And it does make your life better? And the answer to those are unequivocally, they don't. So let's throw that out first. So now we've got these two people. So there's been some really interesting studies on that. One of the most interesting ones were a couple of studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine. One was done in 1988 and the other one was done in 2000. And the first one was they looked at adopted kids, but I'm going to talk about that study second because I think the order is better if I talk about the identical twin study first. So what these people were doing is they were looking at what happens with identical twins, meaning they that are separated early in life, like at birth. So they have identical genes, not similar genes. They have identical genes. Everything about them is genetically, they're photocopies of each other in terms of their genome, in terms of their genes, not their genome, but their genes. And what they found out is that it was 100% lifestyle that determined whether or not these identical twins were sick or well, what cancer they got, if they got cancer at all, if they were overweight or underweight. It was like, in other words, they were genetically identical, but when we changed their environments because they were separated at birth, what we saw unequivocally was that it was 100% lifestyle that determined whether they were sick or well. That you could get one genetically identical twin who was healthy and one genetically identical twin who was sick, and they were the same age and had the exact same genes. And so I always use that as an example, and I always say to people, look, just use your common sense. What if you took 1,000 identical twins, right? So there's 500 in each group, and one of those groups you said, we're going to live, my lifestyle plan, eat well, move well, think well, innate lifestyle plan. And the other one is you're going to do exactly what you're talking about. You're going to put them on the drugs, the metformin, the blood pressure pills, the statin drugs for cholesterol. What would happen after 20 years? First of all, before they got sick, right? Would you agree that if we took identical twins and one group sat on the couch, ate junk food, had a stressful job that they didn't like, were in a stressful relationship, that's one group, one twin, and the other twin exercised every day, ate healthy food, had healthy relationships, had a psychosocial environment that they really liked. After 5 years, would anyone believe that they would have identical health because they have identical genes? Or would the group that had the sick lifestyle be sicker than the group that had the healthy lifestyle? Everybody listening right now knows the truth, knows what that answer is. Now, we've done it with randomized controlled experiments as well, but we don't need that. Let's just use common sense. And we also know that after that 5 years, if they switched groups, if the healthy ones switched and went over to the sick lifestyle, would that sick lifestyle make that healthy person sick? All those healthy twins sick? And would the healthy lifestyle get all those sick twins and make them healthier? We all know the answer to that too. So the next study they did, actually they did this study earlier in 1988. And by the way, these studies, the twin study was done at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, which is where they award the Nobel Prize. I mean, this is some pretty heady, pretty well-renowned scientists doing this work. But the study they did first, which I think they should have done second because it's more interesting to tell it this way, but then they looked at adopted kids. So these are kids who have no genetic inheritance from their parents. But when they looked at the adopted kids, if one of the parents got cancer before the age of 50, the chance of one of the adopted child developing cancer was something like 500% greater than if one of the parents didn't. Meaning that what did they share? They shared no genetic traits. They shared environment. So just so everybody knows, it's, how they say that the expression is, it's the economy, stupid. When we talk about politics, it's lifestyle, stupid. We already know it's lifestyle. Everybody knows it's lifestyle who's had 1 hour of study of this, right? Now, if you've had 0 hours of study of this, which is most medical doctors, all you're studying is how to diagnose sickness and what pill to give to reduce that number. So you think that the goal of care is drug-induced normal. And you have been taught to believe that drug-induced normal is healthy. Mm-hmm. And so this is really your question. Is drug-induced normal healthy? We all will agree, I think, that lifestyle-induced normal is healthy. That if I get your cholesterol down, which, by the way, is not my goal when I put people on a healthy lifestyle, it's just I want to make them healthy. But we all understand that when people are healthy, they have normal blood pressure. When people are healthy, they have normal cholesterol levels. They have normal blood sugar levels. They have normal moods. They sleep well. They have normal energy, normal sex drive. It's normal. And normal is healthy. It's not common. 90% of people are abnormal because they're sick. Sick is not normal. It's common. Healthy is not common, but it's normal. These are very important things to realize. So there was a really interesting study published in the Annals of Family Medicine in 2012, and the lead author was a woman by the name of Hunt. And what they did was they went and looked at how chronic illness is being treated and whether or not it's successful. And what they found out was a couple of things. One is that very early on in the study, they say, well, what we found out, first of all, that shocked us is that prescription drugs are the fourth leading cause of death in the United States. Properly prescribed drugs, not mistakes, properly prescribed drugs to the right person at the right dose for chronic illness are the fourth leading cause of death.
It's worth, I don't know if you want to come back to that, but it might be worth just going on a quick digression into that, because I think so many people are unaware of what you just said. And it's such an important point. And it's typically when people look at the causes of death in the mainstream, let's say CDC lists the top causes of death in US or in North America, they don't list that as number 4. Because it's not counted as one of the causes of death.
It's not counted as a disease. That's the center of disease control. And so it's not classified as a disease to die of prescription drugs. But everybody knows, it's clear in the literature. I mean, I guess it's, some people don't read the literature, but if you do read the literature, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is published in peer review, Journal of American Medical Association, New England Journal of Medicine, British Medical Journal. Everybody knows this. Mm-hmm. So I would like to circle back to that.
Okay.
And we could talk about that further, because I think first I'd like to explain to people why it's going to become so obvious why that's true.
Yeah.
Right. Because right now it's probably surprising, but in a minute it's going to be self-evident. Mm-hmm. Fair?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So anyway, what they looked at was how are people, why are prescription medications for chronic illness the fourth leading cause of death? Why has the cost of prescription drugs gone up like 600% in the last couple of decades? Why has the rate of prescription drugs gone up by hundreds of percent just over the last couple of decades? Why has the number of people being diagnosed with chronic illness gone up exponentially over the last couple of decades? And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. One is lifestyle, obviously, but the other one is that the drug companies are pressuring to get people on medication earlier and earlier and earlier, and they're pressuring the FDA to change the regulations. They're pressuring with the pharmaceutical reps that are going out to all these medical doctors and taking these for the visits, and they're telling them to get these people on drugs earlier. So things that, and this is all in this Hunt article, American Journal of American Family Medicine, 2012. What they're saying is the doctors are being educated. They're out of school. They're not being educated in their medical school, which, by the way, is basically run by Big Pharma. They're not being educated necessarily by the journals, which are also funded by Big Pharma. They're actually being educated directly by Big Pharma. And these pharmaceutical reps are coming around and telling them basically that they need to prescribe early. And then, of course, Big Pharma has pressured the regulators to say, actually, the target for normal blood pressure is lower each time, right? And as soon as you're diagnosed with like diabetes, now all of a sudden you're automatically put on the other, like the statin or whatever else, much earlier. So they call it this cascading effect. So that they went and looked at a couple of practices, quite a few actually, practices and patients, and they wanted to look at what real practice was happening. And they did Michigan and few other places. Basically, what they found out was the average person was on 5 medications. That's the average person that they saw coming in to see medical, and their quality of life was despicably bad. I mean, staying home because of diarrhea, like, lightheadedness, falls. I mean, all the stuff that you and I know very well, if you just look at what the side effects are of these things, right? And
just one quick point, again, a detail we might want to circle back to is just the fact that all of this is being regarded as the scientific approach to medicine, the evidence-based, quote unquote, approach to medicine. And as you just said, and I've been in hospital settings where I've seen 10, 12 people on 10, 12, 15, 18 different prescription drugs at one time. And anybody who knows the scientific literature knows that in almost every case, there isn't even a single study that exists on the use of all of those different drugs together in the same person. So that it's this great irony of what is seen by many people as the science and evidence-based medicine is, when you actually look under the curtain, is anything but.
Correct. And again, that's also published in peer review in the medical journals. The people lament about this all the time and it gets published but never read. Mm-hmm. So or never reported on. but it's really interesting. I always like to just say to people that, you know, evidence-based medicine is dead. It's now medicine-based evidence. And so even when you talk about evidence-based, what they're saying is they have evidence that taking these drugs will lower blood pressure. They don't have evidence that anyone's healthier or lives longer. They have evidence that these drugs will lower cholesterol. They don't have any evidence that it's going to make people live longer or even prevent heart attacks. Believe it or not, people, look it up. Statins don't prevent heart attacks. It's just outrageous what they and the differences they do report are relative differences, not absolute differences. I don't know how far you want to go down this rabbit hole, but we can circle around to it later. But it's basically just smoke and mirrors. The whole system is based on fraud. And so that is a strong statement. And you're like, how is that possible? And I would say, listen, if you break your leg or get run over, you're going to go into a hospital and you're going to get most likely very good care. When you even go in and get a prescription drug, you're going to go in and find somebody who's probably quite intelligent, who's been educated a long time, but they're educated in a paradigm who thinks that you're sick because you're defective. They have no education in lifestyle or exercise or nutrition. They have almost 0 hours in any of these things. They're literally convinced that that stuff is quackery and that the only way that's scientific to address people who are sick is to give them a drug to change a score on a test, right? And then that once they've, so a drug-induced normal is literally their clinical outcome goal, and they are taught that that is healthcare.
Because if you can measure it, it's very sciencey looking.
Sure, it's science looking, it's quite convincing. And the truth is that they're told right from the get-go that if you lower someone's blood pressure, you made them healthier. That's just not true. If you lower someone's blood pressure with healthy lifestyle choices, it is true. And so maybe one of the best ways for people to realize this is to look at the insurance world, because actuaries know everything. These insurance, they have all the data. They have so much data, it's incredible. And so I often get people to think about this. So imagine if you were applying for life insurance, right? So when you apply for life insurance, you have to take some tests and answer some questions, right? They usually put you through a battery test. And why are they doing that? They're doing that because they're trying to figure out what your risk of death is. They're trying to figure out what the risk of having to pay your surviving, sort of beneficiary is. That's all it's about. So whatever you pay for life insurance is based on a formula that they've created, which tells them what your risk of death is, meaning their risk of having to pay. That's life insurance. So imagine this. So imagine there's two people that go in and they get their all their tests done. Okay. And they all have normal scores, both of them. That's just good. We'll do two, but there's two people. So they have normal blood pressure. They have normal cholesterol levels. They have, normal blood sugar levels. Their body weight's normal, right? All of these BMI, all the things that they use to figure this out. They're all the same. Would they pay the same for health insurance?
Probably, yeah.
What if I told you, Harry, that one of those people was taking blood pressure medication to get their blood pressure to normal, was taking cholesterol medication to get their cholesterol to normal, and was taking metformin or blood pressure medication to get their blood sugar to normal, and the other person was on no medication, but their scores were the same? Harry, this is the answer to your question, isn't it?
It is.
Would they pay the same, Harry?
So the actuaries know, based on the actual hard data of taking those drugs in relationship to the risk of death, they know that the more drugs that you're taking, it doesn't mean that you're getting healthier and healthier and moving further away from death. It means that you're becoming more unhealthy and moving closer to your death. So
you actually get penalized and pay more,
right,
even with normal blood pressure scores, normal cholesterol scores, and normal blood sugar scores, if you're taking medication, because they know for damn straight sure that those people are at more risk of dying and getting sicker. That's death. Let's go to health insurance now, Ari, and run the same scenario. Who would pay more for health insurance? The people, they both have normal scores. But the actuaries also know that the people taking these medications have not been cured, they're not healthier, and they're not going to cost less money moving forward they're going to cost more money moving forward because these medications don't prevent you from needing more medications and they don't prevent you from getting sicker. I'll tell you one more scenario, which is mind blowing, is that they also know that you're going to miss more work and cost more money to your employer. So I don't know if you've heard the term presenteeism. Is that something you're familiar with?
Opposite of absenteeism.
Correct. So presenteeism is you're at work, but you're not producing your productivity is down.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So you're at work, but it's like you're away from work because you're there, but you're not being able to do your job properly, right? So we now know that people who have been diagnosed with the chronic illness, which is what percentage of the workforce again, Ari? The adult workforce?
I don't know.
90% have at least one chronic illness.
Okay, yeah.
Well over half have two or more.
Uh-huh.
The average person with a chronic illness has 90 lost working days per year compared to somebody who doesn't have a diagnosed chronic illness.
Wow.
Putting those people on medications makes them more likely to be less productive at work, not more likely to be more productive, right? So your question has been answered in so many different ways, right? We have so much data on this. It's so unequivocal that, and the other saddest thing is that most people in large corporations, and I've dealt with some, they actually, until they learn this, believe that sickness is a fixed cost. They'll lament about the fact in the car industry that they spend more money on healthcare than they do on steel to make a car, that all the negotiations are not resulting in people getting increased wages because most of the negotiations are about making sure people get health insurance because it's so expensive. The reasons it's so expensive is because so many people are sick, right? If only 10% of your workforce is sick, health insurance is cheap. If 90% are sick, it's super expensive. And so, everywhere we look in society, everywhere we look, what we see is evidence of the fact that it's lifestyle that's making us sick, that the drugs cannot address the lifestyle cause, so that drugs do not get you healthy, right? They make you no less susceptible to getting sicker going forward and early death. They cost a lot of money. So the only people who benefit from that are the people who make a living from prescribing or dispense drugs.
Okay. Many avenues we could go from here. One aspect that might be important for us to address here is there will be some segment, probably not a large segment in my audience, but some segment of the population out there that are proponents of conventional medicine.
Sure.
People who are under who are operating in a paradigm where they say, well, anything that's truly scientific is within the realm under the umbrella of conventional medicine. And so by definition, anything that's not being incorporated within conventional medicine is therefore pseudoscience and quackery. And that paradigm doesn't mesh with what you're saying. There will be some resistance to believing what you're saying, because people will say, well, how could this be? Are all the authorities corrupt? They're all operating in this paradigm where they're prescribing drugs just to affect numbers on a piece of paper, but that don't actually prevent disease and lower our risk of death and make us healthier. This almost to some degree suggests some kind of conspiratorial view, suggesting some kind of like widespread corruption where everybody is knowingly complicit in operating in a medical paradigm that doesn't actually make people healthier. So I know this is a big rabbit hole to dive into, but do you have any words speaking to that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ari. So that's correct, right, Ari? So a couple of things. One is, it's not a conspiracy to commit fraud or wrongdoing or harm if you believe it. Correct? Mm-hmm. So people do believe this. They actually believe that A, either people are sick because of bad genes or inability to self-regulate, or B, that they just won't make the lifestyle changes. It's too hard, so that you might as well give them the drug because they're not going to go home and do it on their own. But we already, but in terms of what's in peer review, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine, or if you're familiar with any of Dean Ornish's work, or I mean, just so you're aware, I mean, when I give a presentation, or when I in my book, I mean, my book, Live Right for Your Species Type, has hundreds and hundreds of peer reviewed scientific references proving everything I just said. It's not like it's not in peer review. It's not like scientists don't know this. Look at the agouti gene studies by Girdle and Waterland, which I can talk about, or the Chow study, looking at environment and cancer. So, just so you understand, this is well known. It hasn't reached into clinical practice because there's a monopoly of control by people who make a living selling drugs and who make a living educating people that drugs are the only either solution because people have bad genes or an inability to self-regulate, or that people just won't change their lifestyle. So give them drugs. But the sad irony, which is also in peer review, by the way, very, very openly spoken about, is that because medical doctors have no training in lifestyle, or how to get people to adopt a healthy lifestyle, or even any understanding of the importance of these things. It's just not in their education. They don't lack the intelligence to learn. They lack the will to learn because they're not paid for lifestyle intervention. That's one of the big crimes of this all. Like, Rip, who's the guy who founded or was the lead, the editor in chief of the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine, who started this. One of his first articles ever written was just lamenting about the fact that there's no incentive to talk about this stuff in clinical practice because they don't get paid to do it, and they don't have any training to do it. And so they think that that's public health. It's outside the realm of intervention because they don't know anything about the interventions. And so they just brush it away as if it's not important. But the reality is that it's the most important. And they admit, by the way, in the system that they can't prevent anything. How can you prevent anything in a system that requires a diagnosis before you can prescribe an intervention? How can you possibly prevent what you have to wait to diagnose before you intervene? It's not possible. So it's very difficult in science, and you look at psychology, you understand how difficult it is for a human being to vote against themselves, or to incorporate new information that means that what they're doing might have to change so significantly that it might change their position of power or authority or cultural respect or financial reimbursement. Like it takes an awful lot for people to give up their living or give up their power or authority or monopoly. But quite clearly, there is a monopoly that's occurring in healthcare, and that monopoly is drug-centric intervention. And so that's indisputable. They have infiltrated everything to the point where most people now believe exactly what you just said, Ari, which is that if it's not a drug, it's probably not healthcare. It doesn't really count. And no matter how many times it's proven that you take one group and give them the drugs and another group and get them changing their lifestyle, no matter how many times you prove that the lifestyle people do better, longer lives. They have better quality of life. They cost less money. They feel better. They look better. They live longer. It doesn't matter how many times you do that, because the system that controls all the reimbursement, all the insurance, what's covered in insurance and what's not covered in insurance, every bit of the whole entire system of reimbursement is controlled by who?
Pharma.
People who either are pharma or work for pharma, period. Now, you might call that conspiratorial. Perhaps that there is an organized conspiracy. In fact, medicine has been found guilty of an organized conspiracy to try and wipe out chiropractic in the United States appellate court, and they did it because it was competition. because they realized it was competition to their monopoly. Pharmaceutical companies are amongst the highest convicted, most notorious convicted felons in the history of the world. They've paid more money in fines for lying about the safety and effectiveness of their medications. They've paid more fines than any other industry in the world.
Yeah,
So
and bad science and fraudulent science
a
and
100%,
misrepresentation of
correct.
data and using statistics to lie is
Of
rampant.
course.
And anybody who doubts this and how widespread this behavior is should read the work of Ben Goldacre, who's written a book called Bad Pharma, and
Yeah,
also has a great TED talk or a couple of great TED talks that you can get for free on YouTube. That talks about all the different ways that bad science is rampant in pharmaceutical funded science.
correct. And so industry funded science, and then they report relative, not absolute difference. And there's thousands and thousands of research articles written, but no valid evidence produced. Yeah, but most people wouldn't understand how to distinguish between valid evidence and invalid evidence, right? Medical doctors are not trained scientists; they're trained practitioners, and so they're not trained to understand research methodology. It's not in their training. I'm not suggesting they're not smart enough. I would never make that claim, but they're not trained. They're not experts in it. And so they believe the pharmaceutical companies. And there's so many incentives to believe in pharmaceutical companies, right from the moment they get into school. They're told they're godlike. They're basically indoctrinated into this paradigm, cult-like paradigm of superiority. And everything they live is reinforces that. How much they get paid, their cultural authority, everything reinforces that. So they have really no good reason to question it, because when people that come into their office never get better, they blame that the person's defective. It's an easy way to say, well, there was nothing more I could do.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter to them that nobody gets better, because they're not told that that's their job to get sick people well. Their job is to medicate sick people, to treat the sickness and manage it. And they're actually, many of them believe that it's not possible to get those sick people better.
Yeah. I will say one more thing, and I know that you'll have a lot to say on this. So at the risk of us diving down a deep rabbit hole, we probably shouldn't go down because it's so politicized. I will say that I always knew, for many years, for decades now, since I started studying health science as a little kid at age 13, I've always had some sense of bad science that exists being funded by industry, by pharma, and how that is influencing doctors and medical school curriculums and the overarching paradigm of the public. But the last few years of what's gone on in the world has actually shown me that whatever degree of pharma influenced corruption at the level of media and government, of lobbying politicians in the United States in particular, whatever degree I thought it was at, is actually, the truth is that it's probably 50 or 100 times or 500 times worse than I ever imagined. And I actually have been shocked at the degree of my own ignorance and naivete around how much corruption exists from industry.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming.
Mm.
And again, I don't love to dwell on the negative stuff. I only talk about it when you bring it up, because it's often used as a way to say, well, the things that you're saying can't be true because somebody in authority doesn't agree with it, right? They don't argue my science. They can't. They can't argue the logic. They can't argue the idea that it's not genes, or that it's, people are defective. They can't argue any of those things. And because they're probably not very well educated on the topic. And B, because it's just hard for them to believe, because they're brought up from the very earliest age, being taught that medicine is the authority, right? The little books, when you're sick, you're taught as a little kid, oh, you go to the doctor, you get a pill. Like everything, that these people are geniuses, and like they're not stupid. And I think maybe perhaps Ari, because I've spent a lot of time, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours reading the literature, and I have a graduate degree in science. So I've conducted, and written and published and presented research. I'm quite good at understanding research because I was trained very well, and I like it. It's I just enjoy. To me, it's like I get to be kind of half lawyer, half scientist. Well, one third lawyer, one third scientist, one third healthcare guy, right? Because I get to kind of put it all together and show people why what they're being told is not truthful. We could go on just think of the food pyramid as an example. I mean, we could just go on, drink dairy for strong bones, or all the mythology that's been out there for so long that is so clearly false and have been admitted to be completely false. And people just have this cognitive dissonance that they have this incredible ability because of the authority and the amount of money that's spent on marketing for these things, that when they admit they were wrong, they don't connect it with the fact that, well, maybe that what you're telling me now is wrong. Like, you think about what just happened, with all this fraud that you're talking about, with the COVID stuff, right? But think to yourself, but don't you remember thalidomide or the opioid crisis? We could go on and on, or all the lawsuits that these people have found for Tylenol, and like these same companies like Pfizer and Moderna that have paid billions of dollars because they were found lying with the Vioxx. And so people wouldn't deny that that's true. They would go, well, obviously it's true. It's reported on, but it can't be true now. It
Yeah,
just can't be true now.
people want to believe that this is the exception to the rule and that these companies are generally
Yes,
have their best interest in mind and
correct.
are trying to improve their health. But actually, if you read
Right.
again Ben Goldacre's work, you realize this is the status quo. Lying and fraudulent science and
100%.
manipulation of statistics
Yes.
in order to misrepresent things, the file drawer effects, hiding all of the studies that don't show positive results for their drugs.
100%.
All of these things are the norm of how they push their agenda and how they conduct science. They're not exceptions to the rule.
No, this is literally a well thought out strategy that's been put in place for decades and paid for, and they've lobbied governments. I mean, during the opioid crisis, right, because of the revolving door with the FDA and industry and lobbyists, during the opioid crisis, at the height of the opioid crisis, they actually got a bill passed to prevent the FDA from cracking down on opioid distribution during the opioid crisis. I mean, if people only understood this, but the problem I have with this, and I'll see if I can find the book. Well, there's another book written by Abramson from Harvard, "Overdosed America," which is another fantastic.
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of these people with very, very like highly credentialed people that or when they talk about when they lowered the level for people to get statin drugs for cholesterol, right? They had 9 studies. Only one of them was an intervention study, and that one said there was no difference. I
Right.
mean, we could go on and on and on with this, but people just either they don't want to know, it can be overwhelming. But what I always say is, but just imagine if you just took what you do know about pharmaceutical companies, right? And government, right?
Right.
Who trusts the government or pharmaceutical companies before this pandemic? Nobody. And then all of a sudden, because they got scared, Ari, how they did it was fear.
Right.
And because people got so scared, they were so frightened that they needed a savior. They needed somebody to take care of them and protect them. And that's also a well developed strategy that's been used many times before in many different places around the world to bring in authoritarian rule. I don't want to get down that rabbit hole, but at the end of the day, what I would say to people is, look, it doesn't matter what you think about pills or the authority of medicine or whether or not they're sick care or health care. It doesn't matter. It only matters that I want you to have a better life. That's all that matters. And what I can say to everybody listening is that I can prove to you that I can give you a better life with lifestyle than pills. But if you want to continue to take the pills, that is certainly your right. But do the lifestyle too,
Mm-hmm.
because it's still going to make your life better whether you take the pill or not. It
Yeah.
doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I don't get anything. I don't get a reward. I don't get more recognition. I'm not more right because medicine's wrong. I, there's the only reason we have to get into this discussion is because it's a binary choice at some point in people's lives, which is that am I going to follow the route that you, way back to your original question, let's imagine there's people that follow, they take the metformin, they take the angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors for the blood pressure, right? And they take the statin drugs for cholesterol. What's their life look like? And so the problem is that no drug can address the effect. Why are you overweight and diabetic and sick? Is it because you have a drug deficiency? Were you born with a deficiency of metformin, statin drugs, and blood pressure pills? Clearly not. So you either have to tell yourself that you're too weak to change your lifestyle, you're just too weak, you can't do it, you're defective emotionally in terms of your self-control, or you have to tell yourself that you're defective genetically, that you somehow are sick because you're defective with a gene or an inability to self-regulate your own cholesterol or moods or blood pressure, or whatever. But at some point, you have to believe you're defective to swallow that lie and swallow those pills.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to tell you you're not defective, that if you don't have the self-control now, we can easily help you develop it. And that when you live a healthy lifestyle, it will become self-evidently true that what I'm telling you is correct.
Mm-hmm.
But put it to the test. Give me 90 days, right? Give me 90 days to put all this to a pragmatic test. Think of the show, The Biggest Loser, right? Do you remember the show?
Sure.
Right. So you took all these people who were all on an enormous number of medications, and they were told basically you will be on these medications for the rest of your life. And they went through an intensive, I wouldn't put people through that intensive unless they wanted to. But what I'm saying is they go through an intensive exercise program, the diet changes, whatever else. And lo and behold, what happens? All of the risk factors go down. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Measured. Many of them are off the pills. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
So how could it have been genetic? How could it have been that they weren't able to regulate their blood pressure? Clearly, they weren't able to regulate their behaviors. Correct? So they needed help with that. But where should we spend our money? Helping people regulate their behaviors, or giving people spending money on drugs to override their ability to regulate their blood pressure and blood sugar? What's going to be a better result? Where should we put our money? And the people who make all their money from pills will tell you, don't put your money into lifestyle. Gee, I wonder why. But where will we get the better return?
There is another layer to this that I think is important, that you've alluded to here and there in what you've said so far, but I think is important to speak to directly. There's a great African-American academic and economist, and you said earlier, it's the economy stupid. Thomas Sowell is an amazing, brilliant economist who's written a ton of books and is just a wise thinker, just a great wise man. And one of the things that he said that I really love and I see is more and more true in every area of life, he said, there are no solutions in life, only trade-offs. And one layer to this story of this scenario I've presented to you is, let's say you do take the statins and the blood pressure lowering drugs and the metformin. What trade-offs exist there? So let's say they are effective in lowering your LDL, cholesterol numbers, your blood pressure, your blood sugar levels, and now you've gotten in this range that your doctor is looking at these numbers and is really happy with. And it's pretty easy. All you got to do is pop a few pills every day. There's very minimal effort required. The trade-off that exists,
especially in Canada and the other countries where it's socialized, so you're not paying out of your pocket, because that's a big deal.
right?
Because people have to pay out of their pocket for those things. They might do a different cost benefit analysis than if it's paid for by their neighbor's tax dollars.
That's true, but even leaving economics aside,
okay,
the physiological trade-offs as far as side effects are an interesting layer to examine here. So, okay, so you take this drug and it creates X effect, lowering blood pressure, lowering cholesterol, lowering blood sugar levels. Okay, let's say it's successful. You're no longer in the diabetic range, yada, yada, yada. However, what's being discovered more and more is that many of these drugs have side effects in other systems of the body. For example, you take statin drugs and you successfully lower your LDL, but now you've increased your risk of neurological disease or diabetes or some other disease. And this is just to name,
big one.
Yeah, just to name one example, but that's another dimension to this story that you're talking about. Now, if you contrast that to eat well, move well, think well, your approach, what side effects exist for proper nutrition or for modifying your psychology, modifying your physical activity levels? What are the side effects that exist in all the other physiological systems of the body as a result of adopting those interventions?
Well, they're severe. You will have a severely increased quality of life, a severely increased daily energy, a severely decreased risk of chronic illness, a severely increased uh, 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 um, chance of living longer. Um, your moods will be severely improved. I mean, there are some side effects, right? So you have to be prepared for that.
So yeah, it's basically what we're looking at is a host of negative side effects or a host of positive side effects.
And what is the drug cascade, Ari? Is that it's generally when you do get a side effect from one of those drugs, what do? They
they
give
put
you
you on
another
another
drug
drug.
to treat the side effect, of
Right,
course.
right.
And so, I mean, just take a real healthy person and put them on 5 medications. Would you think that made that person healthier or sicker?
Mm.
Just took a healthy person and put them on all those drugs. Would
Right.
you say, oh, that person's healthier or sicker? I mean, what's really interesting is that when you talk about metabolic syndrome as an example, right? So there is a diagnostic criteria for metabolic syndrome. Cholesterol profile change, BMI change, blood sugar change, uh, blood pressure change. There's basically it's just looking at metabolic allostatic load, but it's basically a series of things that they do. And then if you have those, you are actually categorized as having metabolic syndrome. But here's what's interesting. In recent years, and I'm talking like over a decade though, the American Diabetic Association, there's a few other ones, the International Diabetes Federation, and all these ones. They have changed the diagnostic criteria for metabolic syndrome, and now it's either you have high cholesterol or you are on medication.
Ah,
Both of those are an equal risk factor for metabolic syndrome. Either you have high blood sugar or you're on medication. Both are an equal risk factor for metabolic syndrome. So, what they've admitted openly in the literature is that taking these drugs to get a drug induced number, just like the life insurance and health insurance people, now they're saying it doesn't even lower your risk of metabolic syndrome. Both are an equal risk factor because we know that your metabolism is so messed up because you're under this chronic stress from a chronically unhealthy lifestyle, and that the drugs don't address that you're at the same risk anyway. It's mind boggling
right.
once you realize that they know. These people know.
And I think this also begs another question that is almost staring us right in the face. It's right there on the surface, but I think most people never bothered to think about it, which is the question of what are side effects? Side effects of drugs. Why do side effects of drugs even exist? Why is it the case that pretty much every drug out there has negative side effects? It has maybe one primary positive benefit, at least symptomatic or at least in terms of lab markers, but
Is it
then
positive,
it's
or are
going to
we
have
convinced it's positive?
yeah, it's going to have a long list of negative effects or on other systems of the body, at least potentially, that things that often occur are known to occur. And yet again, if you contrast that with adopting healthier nutrition, a nutritional intervention or an exercise intervention or meditation or altering circadian rhythm and sleep to sleep better, or anything in the nutrition and lifestyle realm, it has only positive side effects on other physiological systems of the body. And to me, what this speaks to is that we are tinkering with a system that we don't fully understand when we're using this drug-based approach. Our bodies are a complex system that is self-regulating, that has an innate intelligence, that has a drive towards homeostasis and health as the norm. And when you start using chemicals to tinker with that system, and then you look at it through this myopic perspective of just looking at what it does to one particular number, then maybe you get a positive effect there, but then you're externalizing all these harms into other aspects of your physiology. Whereas when you use interventions that work with the innate intelligence of the body, you get only positive side effects. The very presence of negative side effects is almost by definition a sign that you are doing something wrong.
Oh, 100%. So obviously, anything that you do that makes someone sick is obviously that's had a negative effect on that human being's health. And so I think, I mean, you cut me off if you don't want to go down this route, but if I could perhaps just explain a little bit about the physiology of what drugs do.
Sure.
Okay, so what happens if you understand the fact that people don't have high blood pressure, high cholesterol? They're not born with it. It's not genetic. It's not a defect. They develop it. And the reason they develop it is because they're under chronic stress. So chronic illness is chronic stress. If you look at Hans Selye's work, alarm, adaptation, fatigue, death, fatigue and chronic illness are synonymous. They're the same thing. So what happens is if you put your body under an acute small short-term stressor, it will like increase heart rate, increase blood pressure, release all this cortisol, catecholamines, epinephrine. It'll change your cholesterol profile because stress hormones downregulate the uptake of LDL cholesterol at your liver, and they downregulate the production of HDL cholesterol. They change how you make somatomines or insulin-like growth factors, so you're going to get less bone density. They change how you produce sex hormone binding globulin, so you're going to have more free sex hormones around, which kind of leads to cancer. They downregulate insulin receptors. I could go on and on about this, but basically what we know is, and I'm a physiologist, so what we know is physiologically that this stress response is very intelligent and is very appropriate, but it's meant to be short term, because what we're supposed to do is use this physiological change for a fight or flight behavior choice. Fight or flight is not physiology. People misunderstand that and they think there's fight or flight physiology or the fight or flight response. That's not true. There's a physiological stress response whose goal it is to prepare us for the behaviors of fight or flight. And fight or flight is to get us to a healthier environment, because through evolution biology, what we understand is that the only way a human being can express homeostasis without a drug, right, through evolution, is to get into a homeostatic environment. So that you wouldn't want to have homeostatic blood pressure if you're jogging or on a treadmill or running towards to get food, if you're trying to hunt something or run away from a tiger. You wouldn't want to have normal cholesterol if your chances are you're going through a period where you really have a good chance of getting in a fight with a tiger or another human being, because increased cholesterol, that change in cholesterol profile that is done on purpose by the body, it's not a mistake, is because cholesterol is really important for part of the wound clotting and part of the infection prevention. The increased blood sugar is needed for the energy. I mean, all of these things are highly explainable. If you look at some of the work by Jay Shulkin and Peter Sterling and Bruce McEwen, these experts in allostasis and allostatic load, who are explaining that people's internal regulatory mechanisms, their ability to self-regulate, are intact, but they're sick and dying. Why? So where should we intervene? And their answer is people shift their own selves physiologically, right? Their self-regulatory organ, their subconscious brain shifts them into stress physiology, because we're living in stressful environments all the time. We have stressful food. We have stressful lack of sedentary living and exercise. We have stressful air to breathe. We have stressful work environments, stressful social environments. So we're under chronic stress all the time. So our bodies have deliberately elevated blood pressure and blood sugar and changed our cholesterol profile. So when you take a drug, what a drug does is a drug interferes with your body's naturally selected over millennia innate intelligence ability to regulate itself. A drug stops your brain from being able to elevate your blood pressure to the point that you need to get into fight or flight, to get away, to get off the couch, to get away from the tiger. When you take a drug that interferes with the pathway of self-regulation, all of the feedback loops are still in place. The drug doesn't stop the feedback loop or the ability of the subconscious brain to detect environmental demand and detect what your actual blood pressure or cholesterol or blood sugar or all the hormones, everything, right? Everything is being controlled and regulated by your subconscious brain. So the demand stays the same. The drug doesn't stop the stress. Correct. It doesn't take away the bad food, the lack of exercise, the psychosocial stress, the tiger. Drugs don't take away the tiger, right? but they can lower the blood pressure or the blood sugar. But what happens is your brain now, the reason your brain increased your blood sugar or blood pressure in the first place is because it recognized the demand, recognized that the body state of physiology was not ideal to meet that demand, so it changed the physiology on purpose to meet the demand. When you take a drug, the demand stays the same, but now your subconscious brain is being interfered with, and it can't increase that cholesterol or blood pressure the same way because you've got an angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor. So what does your brain do? It now detects a gap between demand and where that physiological variable is. And so it says, wait a minute, our blood pressure is too low for this demand. So what does the brain do? It initiates the exact same stress response that it did in the first place to raise blood pressure, like increasing cortisol and catecholamines and all these other things. So now what happens when you go on these medications is they slowly creep up. Those levels creep up, don't they? If you go on statin drugs, your blood pressure goes up. If you go on blood pressure drugs, your cholesterol changes. If you go on cholesterol and blood pressure meds, now your blood sugar is going to go up. Why? Because your body is there's dumping coal into the furnace, all these stress hormones, because it detects demand, but now it detects that the body's response to it requires upbeating. So when you go off a blood pressure drug, what happens to your blood pressure? It goes up immediately. Why? Because you've had artificial governor on your ability to self-regulate. Now, the pathology is not in our body's response, Ari. The pathology is in our conscious brain's behavior response. We didn't get off the iceberg. We didn't get rid of the tiger. We didn't change our diet. We didn't start exercising more. We didn't get out of the unhealthy relationship or improve that relationship. So the thing that's pathological is our environment and our choices within that environment. But our body's response is intelligent, purposeful, and our regulatory mechanisms are intact. Say the greatest physiologists in the world, and taking a drug only interferes with that. So our body actually produces more of the very hormones and reactions to increase it again, to meet the demand. So if you don't change the demand and you just take the drug, that's why you get the side effect.
Beautifully explained. Okay. I feel like we're getting to a place where we want to wrap up podcast part 1. And I want to do a podcast part 2 where it's more solution focused, where we talk about your recent book, Live Right for Your Species Type, which I love. There's one last piece of this, and I know this is something you could talk about for a long time, but I'm hoping maybe you can give us a succinct answer so you leave time for us to explore the next episode. And that is, there is another criticism leveled at the human health through an ancestral paradigm sort of approach, which is really what we're talking about here. And a big part of the belief in modern conventional medicine, it rests in the idea that we are living much longer than our ancestors did. And that, our ancestors only lived till age 30 or 40 or 50, and now we're living, average lifespans of around 80 years old, and that this is a result of us being healthier in modern times, and thanks to modern medicine, that is extending our lifespan. Can you speak to this idea, this criticism of the health through the ancestral lens paradigm?
Ari, you asked the best questions. I know I said that before, but I mean, because what you're doing is what I like to do, which is I like to address all of the doubts. Because if you leave a door, I always say to people, if you leave a door open that people can escape through without having to change their entire opinion on something or what they believe to be true, they'll always take that door.
Right.
So you've got to make sure that you address all those doors, which is an act of kindness to people so that they can actually feel better changing their worldview or their paradigm, right?
Agreed.
So that's what you're very good at, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll try to be brief. There's a couple of things. One is, let's just talk about lifespan for a second, very quickly, and how lifespan in any population is determined. Lifespan in a population is the average age of death. And so what we know is that it's very difficult to increase lifespan by adding years on to people's already maximum lifespan. So if you take a bunch of people who are 70 and you add, 5 years to those people, well, then you've only added 5 years of lifespan. And if that's if you did it for everybody. So the way that lifespan has always changed dramatically, average lifespan, meaning average age of death, is by changing infant mortality or changing the death of young people. Because if you could imagine that instead of somebody dying at age 2, they now die at age 70, you've added 68 years to the average lifespan statistic for that population. So we always know that the way to add lifespan, average lifespan, is to change to reduce the number of young people dying. Okay, a couple of things. The other thing is that it's a myth that people didn't live long. I mean, how long did Queen Victoria live? You know, how long did Native Americans live? We know that we know that the reason people died, our ancestors died, was not chronic illness. It wasn't cancer. It wasn't diabetes. And the argument is that the incorrect argument is, well, it must be because they didn't live long enough. No, about 20% of them lived well into old age. But the ones who died young didn't die of things that would have been solved by a pill or by modern medicine. They got eaten by a tiger or gored by a rhino or you know, a wildebeest or whatever. Or they broke a leg and got a deep infection, correct? So they weren't dying of the things that 80 to 90% of our health costs are going towards, which is chronic illness. They weren't dying of chronic illness. So the reason that we live longer now has nothing to do with medicine. It has mostly to do with sanitation and refrigeration, to be honest. And by the way, that's also in the peer-reviewed literature and in my book. Everything that you've talked about, these are all the things I've covered in my book because for me, Ari, and I'm probably the same for you, I had to ask myself these questions. In other words, I'm always the hardest on myself before I feel like I've kind of got this thing right. I'm a big doubter, right? All my hypotheses are null. I always assume I'm wrong until proven otherwise, right? And the other thing I like to tell people is just get away from the ancestral health thing for a minute. Just think biology. Ancestral health is really, it's an unnecessary term because it's just biology. If we just study humans like we study every other species on Earth, why do we have to call it ancestral? Mm-hmm. Right? It's just a popular kind of term right now, and I get it, but it's actually superfluous. It's unnecessary, right? It's a descriptor it's absolutely not required. Let's just study biology. And if we study biology, what do we know? We know, and then so if we want to look at lifespan, so our ancestors before we moved into big cities, the average lifespan was about 40, and that average lifespan was 40 because youth died and because people were injured, right? They got broken legs or whatever. There was no emergency care, right? So, and there was no sanitation, but that doesn't really come into play until after we were hunter-gatherers. And then we moved into large cities. Our lifespan went from 40 to 20 on average, right? In fact, today in Calcutta, there's some places, for instance, that now the average lifespan is really, really low. And so, and that's because we lived in crowded cities and sanitation was bad. And we had to then get a bunch of food to these people, but there was no refrigeration. It was terrible. So when we got refrigeration and sanitation, that's what really, and we got rid of accidents, right? We live a very safe, cushy life now. So we don't get in a lot of accidents and die, but our life is so cushy that we have a lot of time to develop chronic illness. So now we die of chronic illness, but chronic illness takes longer to kill you than a rhinoceros goring you. That's why we're living longer. And I might add, all these chronic illnesses that we talk about, the most rapid increase in chronic illness are amongst our youth. Breast cancer is not an illness of elderly women. Obesity is not heart disease. These are not things that are killing people at 90. We know that all the chronic illnesses are rising most rapidly in young people. So the idea that you could blame chronic illness on the fact that we're living longer makes no sense statistically or biologically. That's just not true and is proven to be false in the literature.
Mm-hmm. Brilliantly explained. Okay, so let's end part one and we'll move on to part two now. And for everybody listening, in the next episode, we are going to delve into Dr. Chestnut's book, Live Right for Your Species Type, and practical solutions. So we've outlined the problem, in what we've talked about so far. And now we're going to get into his solutions of how you actually improve your health and prevent or reverse disease.